Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Beat the Big Guys. Hi, I'm Sandy Rosenthal, your host. Today, I'm interviewing a guest I'm so excited about. I've been excited ever since I finished reading her book a couple of weeks ago. And my guest, Michelle Stiles, was actually referred to me by a colleague of mine who is a internet activist, but most interestingly, he's an internet commercialization specialist. In short, he's a genius. He's a genius. And when Ken McCarthy recommends someone to me, I listen. And Ken did not disappoint. I so look forward to your hearing my discussion today with Michelle Stiles, who authored the book One Idea to Rule Them All: Reverse Engineering American Propaganda. So my guest is here right now. Hello, Michelle.
Hi, Sandy. Nice to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're so welcome. I just can't wait to really get into the meat of your book. There were so many gems. I hope we were able to get to all of them. But of course, we want people to read the book too, right? So you don't want to give away everything.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
So this book has only been out since November of 2022. So it is a really, really recent book. And I think this book should be required reading in colleges in political science and communications for starters, and maybe other disciplines as well. But we'll talk all about it. Let me first give a little introduction to our listeners throughout the nation who may not already be familiar with Michelle Stiles. Michelle is a physical therapist by trade, and she is the author of several books in her field, as well as a patent holder for a unique therapy product to improve outcomes following knee surgery. And I happen to know that knee surgery is even more complex than hip surgery and hip replacement. So that's impressive. Michelle is also a lifelong reader whose desire to follow the truth has led to some amazing places, including down the rabbit hole of exploring the roots of propaganda. Jess, I'm going to say that again. She is also a lifelong reader whose desire to follow the truth has led to some amazing places, including down the rabbit hole of exploring the roots of propaganda. Michelle's hope is that with exposure, the wolves will be easily recognized. And I am certain that those wolves will get recognized. And we're going to talk all about it today. So, Michelle, it's so good to finally meet you. I've been looking forward to this moment. And what I'd like to do now is turn the mic over to you. And you can talk a little about what led you to write this great book.
Well, thank you, Sandy. I appreciate it. And it's my pleasure to meet you, because I've read your book, and I just think it's fantastic, and tribute to you for being such a tenacious person to withstand what you did. So I was inspired by that. But
Thank you.
To go back, thank you. Yeah. To go back to what led me to writing this book. And again, I didn't intend to write a book. I was just confronted face first with some real corruption in a local school district that, as I followed the trail, led to corruption, you know what I mean, in the educational system up the, can we can we delete that and start over? Where do you want me to start, Sandy?
Just start wherever you like.
Okay, I'll start. So what led me to write the book was that I encountered systemic corruption in a local school board, and all up the educational chain in New York. It was like Tammany Hill of the educational system. And when I encountered that, the whole model for my world changed, right? I was naive up to that point, and I said, wow, I don't have a model of the world that fits, right? It didn't. I was like, I didn't expect corruption like this. And then I thought to myself, this is just a small city, and what is it like in DC? I can't even imagine. And so for some reason, it was around 2008, I saw Barack Obama rising at that time. I thought, this guy doesn't have the qualifications. And he seemed like almost like a made up image of something that we were passing through the system. And so I just thought to myself, I just want to start investigating propaganda. And I don't know why I picked that word really, to be honest, but I went to the most recent source, which was Chomsky, and he's really obscure, pedantic, and it turns out he's quite a globalist himself. So I quickly hopped away from him. I hit Jacques Ellul, who wrote a book in the 70s, and that was very theoretical, and I got something out of that. But that sent me to Creel. And when I hit Creel, George Creel is the head of the Committee on Public Information, and he wrote a book, How We Advertised America. And I thought, wait a minute, shouldn't you either have good reasons for going to war or not? You shouldn't be advertising a war. And so he was, the head of everything. And after the end, he did a victory lap and wrote this book, and he reveals some shocking things. And I thought, man, I didn't learn any of this in high school. I mean, we should know this. And I kept talking to people, my friends and family. I'm like, did you know this? Did you know this? And almost to be annoying. And then that's what led me down the rabbit hole. And then I just started exploring resources, and I would go where that took me. So that was really how I got into learning about this subject.
The subject, the word alone, propaganda. You point out in your book that word has been rather buried. I mean, that word isn't really being used anymore. And we can get into why it's not being used. That's a whole nother conversation. But it's alive and well and going on all around us every day. And
exactly.
it doesn't really matter what you call it, but it is and why don't you go ahead and just describe, to our listeners that haven't read the book yet, what it is and how it works.
Right. So that word was used early on in the war, and then the First World War. In that interwar period, the investigation into propaganda exploded. People were angry at what happened to them, and there was, in fact, I have a book. I showed it on Ken's thing, but it's a bibliography. It's a 300-page book from Harold Laswell of all the studies of propaganda. Now, when you hit World War II, you see that, well, let's back up a little bit. Bernays in the 1920s tried to rehab the image of propaganda, saying, hey, it can be used for good or bad. It's just influencing public opinion, right? And so, but it didn't really fly. People, and that's why he chose public relations. Okay, he didn't say we were a propagandist. He went away from that term. So we get to World War II, and propaganda is just pinned to the enemy. It's enemy propaganda, Nazi propaganda. And so then following that, you just don't see it ever referred to or acknowledged as happening or being used in America. But what really is the truth is the science behind it gets splintered into a number of different disciplines, which is like you can't follow it. So it's psychology, sociology, public relations, media studies, journalism, political science, and even statistics, right? Because you have to have public opinion polls to track what you're doing. So, you have the bones of this entity split into a myriad of disciplines, and you cannot see it. And that's why I say
it's difficult. If you don't know what you're seeing, it's difficult to see.
Yeah, it's difficult to recognize. It's hidden from the average person. And it's interesting because right now they're doing this campaign to basically say that you and I are publishing our misinformation and disinformation. They're not calling it propaganda so much, but that's a threat to democracy. So they've turned the heads up. They have the real threat. They have an idea syndicate, Sandy, an idea cartel, right? That dominates public opinion and has for the past 100 years, but we're the ones that are a threat to democracy. See how they've inverted it? So people, part of that is we have to be aware and go, this isn't in truth the danger. We are not the danger, because we do not have access to costly, sophisticated campaigns. And I make that point in the book, that real propaganda is very, very expensive. And you and I cannot participate in that.
Which is a sign that it's going on, because it's very expensive. But yes, that's so there are lots of ways, as you point out somewhere in the book, you say you can find the people orchestrating this propaganda, because they leave clues like rat droppings. I thought that was a very good analogy. So let's talk about this a little more. And to make it a little bit more accessible to our listeners, this is going on everywhere, but it's not one big campaign. There's like thousands of campaigns going on every day, and a lot of them come to an end. They have a beginning and an end, and then they're over. And I was witnessed one of these campaigns myself when the levees broke after Hurricane Katrina, and Michelle, I was so confused by what I was seeing, the way the media was acting, the way academia was acting, the way people that I thought were intelligent were acting, and none of it made sense. I was just so confused. Well, now I understand what was going on. It was what you call Operation Sheepskin. In other words, a small cabal of people had made up their minds. This is what they wanted. And they got to work right after Hurricane Katrina, and the first thing they did was they reframed the disaster. So the flooding disaster that most people think the flooding disaster that most people think was just a natural disaster, or a little more than that. That was framed in the minds of framed as being caused by the people of New Orleans for not paying attention to the levees. So they reframed it to it's the people of New Orleans, who were the victims. It was their fault. And then they had to go and get people to say this. You don't have tribal elders anymore. You don't have the wise men in your village anymore, like we did 100 years ago. So what they do is they create tribal elders. And in the case of New Orleans, it was the Bring Back New Orleans Commission. And every single committee all chimed, this is our fault. This is the local levee board's fault that we flooded. And they all repeated this mantra, which was so confusing to me at the time. And also fake grassroots groups sprung up that looked like they'd sprung from nothing, but they were actually created by this cabal to do the bidding of the cabal. I'm keeping it brief and simple right now. My book gets into all of this in much more detail. Then they had to bring in the press. And lo and behold, the press repeated this lie over and over and over again. Anything the commission said, they repeated. Anything the grassroots group said, they repeated. Meanwhile, I'm going crazy because I don't understand why this is happening. And then finally, about 18 months or 2 years later, this all was to fix the problem of this is the locals' fault. We need to consolidate the levee boards. And it ended up a constitutional amendment got passed. Legislation got passed, even though it was in an environment of chaos, by the way. All of New Orleans, 80% of New Orleans flooded. So that's exactly what happened. Hook, line, and sinker, Operation Sheepskin, which is outlined on page 103 of Michelle's book. When I read page 103, I felt like I saw my life during those 2 years just pass in front of my eyes, because that's exactly what happened. And by the way, you know what that legislation did, what it succeeded in doing? Consolidated control of money. Yes. So now, instead of all these independent levee boards, 5 or 6 different levee boards controlling their own budgets, it's one levee board with one budget. And guess what? This legislation created a nominating committee. This nominating committee had life terms, and their job was to decide who is going to spend $60 million every single year. They've consolidated control of money. That's all it did. Oh, they believe me. They don't say that. They don't promote it that way,
Right.
but that's what it was. And I get into a lot more detail in my book, but Ms. Stiles, I should call you Dr. Stiles. I'm just so impressed. Has figured out that it's all one concise, prepackaged process. That if you know what you're looking at, it's very easy to see.
Right. Sandy, you know, in Brené's book, he goes over an example of, like, he says, look, the politicians of the future are not going to appeal to rational thought. We don't have to do that anymore. We know how to manipulate opinion. So we're going to seed the environment with experiences, because seeing is believing. Okay, we're gonna raise up a phony boycott over here, and then we're gonna have some academic release some critical paper, and then over here, and it's all gonna seem organic, like it's just arising out of the population. The tribal elders, as the media, will then say, oh, here's the problem that we need to solve. Now, meanwhile, you know, like this may be just think about a house, for example, okay, and you say, well, there's, you know, a broken down staircase that we need to fix. This is like the media saying, hey, there's a broken down staircase we need to fix, but meanwhile, there's a fire in the kitchen. Like, our real problem is over here, but the tribal elders will say, you know, here's our problem. This is the problem to solve. Okay, now, behind that is a prepackaged solution that they want to consolidate power, resources, and finances, right? So that's where the experiences lead to the definition of the problem, lead to the predefined solution that the authorities bring up and offer to the public. Then there's a clamoring to get that solution done, depending on what magnitude the experiences are. Like, if you have a magnitude like 9/11 or a hurricane or something like that, then there's a more urgency into the flow of this Operation Sheepskin. Does that make sense?
That's a great time to do an Operation Sheepskin in the middle of a
Absolutely.
disaster.
Right. And
It's
so
an environment of chaos.
Yes. And so that plays on, in the book, I call it the primal architecture of the brain. Okay, so as you ramp up the unknown or insecurity, right, there's that little graph, then you create a much greater drive to go back to safety and security. And people will make incredibly bad decisions the further out that line they are. And so you can really manipulate people and drive things through the legislature that you could never do in ordinary times. That's why.
The only thing I'm going to add to that, 100% true. And the only thing I'm going to add to that is, in a disaster, the average family is trying to figure out, where am I going to live?
Right.
How am I going to work? They're dealing with their own chaoses of their own life, so they don't have the time.
Right.
They let someone else take care of that. And they're saying we need to consolidate the levee boards. Okay. So that's a great time to push through a change.
Distracted. Right.
When they're distracted with their own life, they can't. So
you can't fight back.
Can't fight. So on you will, and I love the way you talk about the media. You got into it on page 2, talking about the media by calling it an industrial complex. Nothing could be further from the truth. And you point out that most people think that the media is an independent source committed to discovering and reporting the truth. But as you rightly say, it's an industrial complex, and which is so true, a money-making industrial complex. And another thing, most people think if the media is covering something, well, it must be important. We do that every day. And we don't realize we're doing it. But just because the media covers something, that doesn't mean it's important. And just because the media doesn't cover something, the converse is also true. That doesn't mean it's not important.
Let me read you a great quote, Sandy, if you will. Let me read you a great quote from Walter Lippmann. Okay. It says, you remember Walter Lippmann, right?
Yep, he was in the book.
The power to determine each day what shall seem important and what shall be neglected is a power unlike any that has been exercised since the Pope lost his hold on the secular mind. It's great. So, I mean,
That's a great quote.
they
The
knew back then, it's like, great, what we say is important is what's important. And that's what I'm saying about the house burning down, but we're going to identify the rundown stairs, right?
right.
They're not trustworthy tribal elders, but yet we're giving them that trust.
And how do they do it? Well, as we've seen a lot, especially in the past few years, this Cabo who stays out of sight. They go to great length to stay out of sight. But they're leading what's going on. So what the Cable's doing, in my case, the big guys, is they have their mouthpieces out there saying the same thing over and over without proof, and saying it over and over and over again. And anybody that questions them is called insane or deluded, like I was. When I tried to question that whole levee board consolidation, every time I tried to ask questions, I would be told, "What's the matter with you?
Yeah.
What do you
Yeah,
you
you're
want
insane.
corruption?"
Yeah.
and
Right.
and then the other thing, that the reason it works so well, which is true, is this and these campaigns work, is most people don't like being singled out,
Right.
and being called deluded or psychotic or stupid. Most people don't like that, but so that if you're going to stand up against it, you just have to be. You're not stupid. There's nothing wrong with you. You're just speaking up because you need to speak up. But that's why it works too often. That's the reason that it works so well. You there's I hear reason for hope. For a long time, the second half of the 20th century, access to events was blocked, and that's when the propaganda, these campaigns, was easy to do. But now it's too easy to get access to events because you can interview witnesses now. So that's cause
Right.
for hope. Wouldn't you think?
Absolutely. The internet has really changed the game because
Mm-hmm.
we can get out a data
Mm-hmm.
that is raw data. So
Mm-hmm.
they can create a narrative, but if we can look at raw data, we can piece together try to get to the real story as much as that's possible from
Mm-hmm.
the raw data. And so having that available to us has been a huge benefit to the alternative media, and I think why we see this sort of the iceberg cracking a little bit toward breaking through to the truth, basically.
There is reason for hope, and we'll have more of those coming through. You on page 53, I love the way you worded this. So the big guys, or the cabal, whatever you want to call them, is no discussion was ever intended or desired. No discussion. Okay.
Right.
The stage sequence of events are choreographed to win support for a predetermined outcome, regardless of the merits of the issue.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. We don't have a say in it, and when you read Lippmann, it's shocking. He basically is saying, hey, you know what? Democracy doesn't work. You people are kind of too stupid, really, to figure out these problems are all complex. It's worldwide, and the experts are going to decide what to do. And then
For our own good.
right. And then they just basically feed us the Operation Sheepskin, steer us through whatever gates they want us to go. And, that's how they've basically ruled for the last 100 years. And,
So here's
go ahead. The
no,
point,
you go first.
it's important that people realize that Upton Sinclair, George Seldes, a number of other what were independent reporters at that time, they didn't go through schooling in the early 1900s to be a reporter. You were sort of a self-made person. They were sounding the alarm during that time that the media was so corrupt. These big owners, you know what I mean? They determined what happened and what didn't. And Upton Sinclair waited until mostly toward the end of his career to write Brass Check, which basically showed all the shenanigans and all the corruption that had been done by the media toward him. And so it's important to remember that never got addressed. That never changed. They've consolidated more and more and more. And so you just do not have any sort of independent effort for truth from the news at this point, and people have to be really, that's what we don't know our history, and we should, and it would help us.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that. And I'm going to remind our listeners that when you read this extremely readable book, this is very readable. Okay. It's not a heavy text. And when you read it, you're going to get the history of how we got to this point. And it's fascinating. And so thank you for reminding me about that. So on cause for hope, how can we recognize that we are under the influence of Operation Sheepskin? Well, one of the things is when something is a big story is being told to us, and a shocking story, and then we're told, oh, we can't give you the identity of who said this, or we can't give you any details. That has to be kept secret. That's a warning, as you call it. It's a red flag.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And whenever someone says, oh, it's a secret, I can't tell you for your own good or for the good of something, that's a warning, and it's a red flag. It happened to me when I was trying to get out the word about the big lie. And you did a very interesting example, talked about a very interesting example where a young girl, a teenager, was actually testified, a teenager from the Middle East testified, but they couldn't tell you who she was. Help remind me.
She was actually the daughter of the ambassador.
That's who she really was. Yeah, but they never didn't give any details about who she was.
Right,
and had to protect her. And she talked about atrocities going on.
She testified. Yes, exactly.
But exactly. couldn't identify
that whole campaign. Yeah,
for her safety.
Yeah. Yeah, so you couldn't track it back. I mean, you would go, like the flag would go up, and you'd be like, wait a minute, daughter of the ambassador. But that's hardly a non-conflicted interest witness, right?
And these are going on everywhere, right in front of us. When people are being told, oh, I can't tell you that information, you got to keep that a secret. And another thing that another proof that you're under the influence of Operation Sheepskin is when you see expensive, glossy, when you see TV ads. TV ads are insanely expensive. I mean, only car companies and beer companies have the money to be in the Super Bowl. I mean, TV ads are insanely expensive. If you see a TV ad, or if you see glossy pamphlets and flyers, those cost a lot of money, which is a big clue that this is not, you're not really seeing a grassroots campaign. You're seeing a businessman's campaign or a political campaign.
Right. The other thing, too, with that, Sandy, is the timeliness. Like to organize something, a lot of times you'll see an event happen in the public square, and then like right after that there's this rollout of this amazing like protest, and they get the signs and everything. It's like you can't do that in that short amount of time, right? So it just showed your spider senses say, wait a minute, that would take a lot. If it was grassroots, it would take a long time to organize. And so you'll see it, and that's how you kind of can recognize that it's a campaign from the start.
Yes,
because those things are at the ready, and they go boom, 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 and you're like, you just don't
slick and well oiled. It can't be real. It can't be real. It's too good to be true. On page 59, you talk about how those that are the people who are controlling Operation Sheepskin and controlling these paid promotions are going to be the winners, and it's really not fair. It's not fair that we're in a society with the people with the money can do these campaigns. And I want to point out there's a really good book by Ed Walker called Grassroots for Hire. And it's a textbook. You familiar with it? Grassroots for Hire?
I haven't read it, but it's in my queue.
Mm-hmm. I've invited him to be a guest on my show, and he's on sabbatical right now. But that's a great book. I just wanted to bring to everyone's attention. But again, this cabal's main goal is to stay out of sight, and they really do a good job of staying out of sight. But they leave trails, they leave clues, like rat droppings. Mm-hmm. And again, but once, as you point out on page 116, once you understand these patterns, it's child's play to understand these confusing optics. And it is confusing if you don't understand what you're seeing, but it's child's play once you understand the patterns.
Right. And again, you need to go back. I think historically, my feeling was that, when you start to try to use current events to explain propaganda, people, you really run aground to just walls that come up, based on the right and left perspectives. And, so you have to go back further. And then when you see that, they were laying this out early, early 1900s and even sometimes earlier, but it makes sense to you. You can see this is why we're so far into this. It's actually an idea syndicate. And that's, let me just give you here's a definition, right? Networks of the powerful and wealthy who work together to manipulate public opinion in a clandestine way to consolidate power, resources, okay, and wealth and finances. Okay. So, and they use sophisticated, costly campaigns to do so. Right. So that's a idea syndicate, and the most people with the most money win.
Yes.
Sandy, that's
not fair.
the bottom line. Right. And so they've been
Right.
running campaign after campaign for 100 years. And what do we have? We have the 99 over the 1%, right? What happened in coronavirus? Consolidation, massive consolidation, wiping out the middle class, right? Closing mom and pop shops, right? While Walmart stayed open, and all these other. So you had more consolidation. So
and remember what Fauci's response was? He said, "Well, I didn't think about that." He said, "I'm a doctor.
Yeah.
I'm a whatever he is. I'm an epidemiologist. I didn't think about that. The economic consequences. That was the excuse." So, absolutely. On page 118, you again, most people think the press lives and breathes for the express purpose of exposing frauds and liars. No. Sam Husseini with the Institute for Public Accuracy did a really good blog post very recently. And he points out that what media does is they expose minor frauds and minor liars, and to take our attention away from the big frauds and the big liars. And I think he's got a really good point.
Right. No, it's misdirection. It's highlighting small problems that aren't the real, so we're being sold down the river with it. We've given the media this huge trust and they've abandoned it. And so I think of the media as actually like a howitzer on the hill, and people really have to realize that okay, so you have anyone who tries to speak up against it, right? That narrative that these are the problems, these are the tiny little problems, these are the only problems, and if any other voices start to say anything, that howitzer just goes trains it on Sandy and takes Sandy out, right? Sandy's an idiot, Sandy's a loon, Sandy's a conspiracy theorist.
You name it, I've been called it.
Yeah, Sandy's a little bit demented, she's getting older, or what, what I mean? Anything that they can think to say and paste on anybody else, right? Which is, so until we address the media, right, as, and really have a revolution in our thinking of we can't trust them, period. And I think, that's getting, their trust is at an all-time low, but people don't know where else to go either. So that's another issue.
You raise a good point. So in my work, exposing the Army Corps of Engineers as being the culprit in the flooding of New Orleans, I've dealt with hundreds and hundreds of reporters. After all said and done, there are some reporters I respect. I can count them on one hand.
Right.
One hand.
Right. But see, then, so here's the other thing, though, is it's the training, right? They come up through journalism school. And now when you have that, they have loans over their heads. They've been indoctrinated into a particular thought process. And that is as well part of the idea syndicate, if we get into that sometime, maybe. But go ahead.
Sure. And there were so many gems in the book, and we're getting close to time to wrap up. And I do want to end on a positive note, that why we have reasons to feel hope, which we absolutely do. I have to share those as well. But I do want to talk about one last thing you said on page 217. that look at what's being done and where the money goes, not what's being said. And that is so true. And I'd like to share one personal anecdote with myself. I actually pushed for legislation to change those life terms. Okay. Remember those life terms I spoke of? There was too much control. And I did get, the law did pass because the legislators all agreed that life terms is a bad thing. But you wouldn't believe the pushback I got from those fake grassroots groups that I told you about. And they were screaming at me, and they were all saying basically that Sandy has a personal vendetta against the people on that nominating committee with those life terms. And that's all they said. Sandy's, it's a personal vengeance, a vendetta. And I spoke to before the bill passed, I spoke to one of the lead legislators, and I asked him, have you noticed that rather than discuss the merits of the bill, all the detractors are doing is hurling personal insults? And to his credit, he said, yes, I noticed that. I definitely noticed that. So there is cause for hope. I mean, people are human, and they're not stupid.
Right. Exactly.
So, so Michelle, you ask a question on page 235 near the close of your book. Will there be anyone who can lead us back to the old idea of truth and authentic relationship that existed prior to the propaganda tsunami that was unleashed in the 20th century and now pervades the 20th century? You asked that question. And I can say a big, huge yes, because people are human. They're not machines. And the cabals behind these campaigns and the people behind the syndicate, they're not robots and computers. They're actually people. And you know what people do when they're really arrogant? They make big mistakes, huge mistakes, and they expose themselves.
Right.
And like no different from the mistake that the wizard made at the end of Wizard of Oz. He made a mistake. Remember that mistake?
Absolutely.
He let a little dog pull back the curtain.
Right.
And the whole movie changed after that. It was like a complete change. The wizard's been exposed. The lie's been exposed. And the bigger they are, the bigger mistakes they make. And I actually did an entire episode on this issue, episode 52, where I compare the big guys to the bullies on the fourth grade playground. They're really no different. And once you see these patterns that Michelle talks about, I keep wanting to call her Dr. Stiles. Okay, you should be a teaching professor. But once you see the patterns, and once you see that, and once you start thinking of the big guys that look like they're fighting you as bullies on the fourth grade playground, it's easy. It's easy.
Yeah, Cindy, you're absolutely right. The game's up when that curtain gets pulled back, when you can see the ideological scaffolding that's been built to basically benefit the 1%, the globalists, right, and where they're leading us. And it has nothing to do with the good of the sheep. And it's trust and betrayal, right? They've vampired trust in the system. And then now when that trust is broken, it's broken. Okay, there goes the curtain. There's this guy who's not really powerful. He's just standing there into a microphone. He's got the media. He's put networks together, like you say, these phony grassroots. That's money. That takes a ton of money. I'm gonna spin up a group over here. You know, that's a couple $100,000. We can't do that. You know, and so once you can lay that out and people see it, you know, the sheep do not have to follow that, and they won't, because they know it's phony. So they'll see it for what it is. And but you know, we have to be trying to, you know, instruct the kids too, because like for you and me, we got slammed with corruption right in our face, right? And we went, oh, wait a minute, time to change our model of the world. It's not working. What am I missing here? But think about kids growing up in this system. how is it, like I part of the reason why I wrote the book, can I help them at a really young age to see it? And then their whole world changes. The whole world changes because it becomes a different set of problems. You know what I mean? We have different problems. It's how to unseat them, right? Not the problems that they've been telling us are the real problems. Does that make sense?
Yes, I am going to help get that word out. I'm going to do everything in my power, starting with just having this conversation today and reaching my national audience. People need to see what's going on, and it's right there, and it's right there in front of their faces. They only need to look. It's there, and we've talked about all the ways to see it today. If you read Ms. Stiles' books, she has lots more gems in there than we were able to cover in just today's 35, 40 minutes. And there's totally reason for hope. Absolutely. Michelle, is there anything you'd like to share with our listeners before we sign off?
I think you really covered it. It's just the fact that it's a critical race right now that we're in, right? They're pushing to consolidate and surveil and enslave really humanity. And we're the ice is breaking. They've made some big mistakes, like you mentioned, Sandy. They've made some mistakes. People's eyes are open, but we have to organize, and we have to wake up more people, because there's obviously more of us than there are of them. And if that breaks open to some real revelations, broad sweeping, at least 10% or more of the population, then there's a critical mass there. But it's a race, because they're going to throw a lot of things at us coming down the wire. You know what I mean? They have a lot of power. They've consolidated a lot of power, a lot of resources. And so
Michelle, could you repeat?
There's hope while there's still light, while there's day out.
Michelle, we had a bad connection for the past 10 seconds. So you mentioned, could you repeat when you said there was a lot of people involved in this and in this syndicate, and then what came right after that? Maybe you should backtrack a couple of sentences.
Okay, maybe I'll just kind of go over what that final thought, right?
Okay.
The final thought is that just there's a race here. The globalists are really trying to continue to consolidate, surveil, and enslave humanity, right? They're tyrants, and we want a free humanity and a free future. And as they've, like you've said, Sandy, they've made mistakes. They've made big mistakes, and people can see now. They're starting to see, the COVID thing looks like a marketing rollout now in hindsight to a lot of people. Trust in the media is at an all-time low. So they're running out of time, with the dollar coming to the end of its usefulness, and so they have to enslave humanity, and we're breaking the ice to revelation and a better future. And so there is hope, right? But we have to keep working, because it is a race, and they're going to throw a lot of things at us. A lot of devastating things they can throw at us still, right? And they can use the leverage of resources, food, water, those kinds of things, and war as leverage to make us sheep do what they want. And so I prayed daily for courage, Sandy. We're going to need a lot of it. Facing the truth, or speaking the truth, is not going to be easy, and we're going to have really valiant people who don't care for their finances and for their own well-being, to be honest.
But there is hope.
There is hope. Absolutely.
Well, thank you so much, Michelle, for joining me today. I hope all of you, our listeners, enjoyed this episode. Please be sure to rate, subscribe, and like this podcast on all of your favorite platforms for Beat the Big Guys. And remember, no matter who you are, you too can beat the big guys. Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Sandy, so much for having me on.
So stay with me one more second. I'm going to stop recording.